Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a world of velvet drapes, gaslit alleys and ticking mantel clocks. The sleepless world of Victorian Britain. It's past midnight in London. Outside, the narrow streets are slick with rain, horse-drawn cabs creak by, and somewhere down the alley, a newsboy coughs into the mist. Upstairs, in a creaky townhouse, you lie wide awake in a corset-loosened nightgown or scratchy woolen nightshirt, staring at the ceiling and counting the spots in the wallpaper. The world is quiet, except for the unrelenting ticking of the clock on the mantel. You've already had your milk, fluffed your goose-down pillow and read 2 chapters of something thoroughly dull by candlelight, and still sleep refuses to come. You see, Victorian Britain had a little insomnia problem, not the modern TikTok scrolling double espresso at 9 p.m. kind. No, this was a more dignified, more agonized variety. Doctors blamed it on nervous exhaustion, spiritual malaise, or brain congestion, depending on which textbook or pamphlet you consulted between 1850 and 1890. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe fluff your pillows, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glance at the flickering gas lamp by your bedside, installed last winter at great expense. A luxury, yes, but also a curse. It hisses faintly, leaking light into the corners of the room, tricking your body into thinking it's still early evening. Melatonin? That hasn't been discovered yet, but your body knows something is off. Many Victorians blamed the insomnia epidemic on the modern marvels of their day. The electric telegraph, the railway, and the newspaper. Trains shattered quiet country nights. Newsboys shouted headlines into every street. Time itself became rigid, divided into train timetables and factory bells. You no longer woke with the sun and slept when darkness came. You woke at 6, worked till 6, ate at 7, and tried to sleep at 10, whether your body agreed or not. Historians still argue whether the explosion of sleeplessness was truly physiological or just another Victorian obsession, but they wrote about it constantly. Diaries, pamphlets, medical journals, all full of sleepless voices pacing wooden floors and whispering complaints to the doctor. And yet, despite all this fretting, nighttime remained beautiful. On some nights like this one, you hear the soft clop of hooves in the distance and the faint echo of a lamplighter's ladder tapping stone. You draw the blankets tighter around your feet and wait for your eyes to grow heavy. It doesn't happen. Instead, you remember the neighbour who swore by tying raw onions in a cloth and placing them beneath her bed. Or your cousin George, who rubs eucalyptus oil on his temples and counts backward from 500. You've tried both. They made the room smell like soup and gave you a headache, respectively. You rise, careful not to wake the dog curled at the foot of the bed. Your slippers are cold. You cross the parquet floor and peer out the window. A drunk stumbles beneath a flickering lamp, humming something off-key. Somewhere down the street, a baby cries. That baby, you think bitterly, will fall asleep before you do. The doctor said your brain might be overstimulated. He suggested less reading, fewer worries, and more fresh air. But fresh air means walking through smog and coal soot. And fewer worries? Not when your brother lost money in the South American railways last week, and Aunt Marjorie insists on sending daily telegrams about her bladder. The clock ticks louder. You consider reaching for the laudanum bottle, just a drop, but decide against it. That's tomorrow's section. Instead, you stare into the gaslight again, watching its little flame flutter, like a trapped spirit. You think about all the others across the city, lying just like this, eyes wide open, brains buzzing with unresolved thoughts. Some will write poems, others will clean already spotless shelves. A few will sneak down to the kitchen and boil milk. You, however, decide to lie back down and listen to the sounds of the house, the faint creak of wood expanding in the night, the sleepy rustle of pigeons roosting near the chimney, the whisper of your own breath. Tomorrow, you'll try one of the new methods, something with a mustard poultice, or perhaps a sandbag-weighted blanket. For now, you wait. Still awake, still curious, still wondering why sleep was so elusive. In a time without screens, notifications, or caffeine on demand. Maybe it's just the human condition. Or maybe it's that mutton you had at dinner. You reach for the porcelain pitcher and basin on your nightstand. The water inside is cold, it always is. But the ritual is oddly comforting. A quick splash to the face, a moment to stare into the tarnished mirror. Still wide awake, it's time to try something stronger. The bottle sits neatly on the vanity. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, wrapped in an elegant paper label with flowery script. For nerves, sleeplessness, and delicate constitutions. You unscrew the cap and peer inside. Just the smell is enough to numb your nose. Laudanum was the Victorian cure-all, sold in every apothecary, trusted by every respectable matron and neurotic poet alike. Babies teethed on it. Soldiers swore by it. Society women dripped it into warm milk before bed. And yes, it helped you sleep. Eventually. But there were risks. Doctors warned of dependence, though not quite in those words. They called it a habit, something one might rely too heavily upon, like umbrella boys or gout slippers. Historians still argue whether laudanum addiction was an epidemic or merely a tolerated side effect of being alive in the 19th century. You try just a drop, enough to warm the throat and invite a slow yawn. But still the night stretches on. You draw a hot bath, well, warm enough. Steam curls against the wallpaper. You step in, bracing for the shock of lukewarm porcelain. Victorians swore by this method, a full soak before bed, followed by flannel wraps and a quick prayer to St. Dymphna, patroness of nervous afflictions. It's more ceremony than science, and don't forget the herbs. Lavender bundles hang from the rafters. Chamomile steeps in a teacup by the tub. You'd tried valerian root once, until it made you dream of birds with human faces, not restful. Tonight, you steep a linen cloth in warm milk, wring it out, and lay it over your eyes. The weight is oddly pleasant, smells faintly of hay. Downstairs, the dog shifts in its sleep. Upstairs, your cousin coughs once, then falls silent. Somewhere in this house, sleep is happening. Just not to you. The trouble is, Victorian houses weren't designed for sleep. Not really. Drafts seep in through windows. Chimneys echo every pigeon footstep. And then there's the noise. Not loud, but constant. The crackle of the gas lamp, the ticking of the mantel clock, the faint hum of your neighbour tuning his violin at ungodly hours. You towel off and return to bed, more damp than dry. Perhaps a doctor could help. The local physician prescribed you something last month. Belladonna. Deadly nightshade, he said brightly as if announcing dessert. A few tinctured drops on the tongue, meant to slow the mind. The first night your pupils grew so wide you mistook your own reflection for a stranger. The second night you saw colours where none existed. The third night you decided sleep deprivation was the safer option. Still, belladonna was fashionable. Queen Victoria's own ladies-in-waiting were rumoured to use it, though mostly for dilated pupils, to appear more dreamy. You suppose it worked. They certainly looked half asleep most of the time. You lie back again and adjust your pillow. You'd stuffed it with lavender and goose feathers, following advice from an 1873 magazine. It worked once, for one night. But now it just reminds you of farmyards and missed sleep. You recall a more peculiar remedy mentioned by a neighbour's cook. Placing a cold potato under your pillow. Absorbs the worries, she said. You tried it once. It turned green. The next morning your worries remained, and so did the smell. Victorians believed in atmospheric cures. Perhaps a breeze would help. You crack the window just slightly and let the night in. Fog curls along the windowsill. The scent of wet stone and distant chimney smoke fills the room. You think of all the other people awake in this moment. Insomniacs, nurses, writers, bakers, burglars. Somewhere across the city, a printer inks a new sheet of The Times. Headlines will be bold, columns tight. But buried on page 7 might be a short opinion on insomnia and its moral causes. Written by a man who definitely hasn't slept well in years. You sip from the chamomile again. It's gone cold. Tastes like boiled grass. In the fire grate, a coal shifts with a tiny clink. You didn't light the fire tonight. It felt like too much effort. And the heat makes the upstairs bedroom unbearable anyway. You adjust the sheets again. Blankets scratch, legs tingle, your mind buzzes. You remember your aunt's suggestion from last Christmas. Prayer and restraint. Sleep, she insisted, would come to those who earned it. No cakes after supper, she warned. No novels, and no fiddling with your teeth. You never quite figured out what she meant by that last one. So, you try prayer. A few words whispered toward the cracked ceiling. You're not sure what you're asking for. Rest, forgiveness, silence. None arrives. You stare at the dark room, lit only by the flicker of gaslight through the cracked curtain. Shadows dance on the wall like figures in a dream you're not allowed to have. And somewhere between the tick of the clock and the rustle of the lavender-stuffed pillow, you wonder, was it always this hard to fall asleep? Or just in an age when even your doctor's cure involved poison? You awaken? Or maybe you never quite slept. The sky outside is still dark, not the cozy blue-grey of dawn, but the dense, ink-like black that makes time feel slippery. You sit up again, brushing crumbs of something, maybe biscuit, maybe dream, off your nightshirt. The candle is half melted, the gas lamp flickers, and the clock strikes 3. This hour has a name now. Early morning wakefulness. A term Victorian physicians began using more often as their patients filled drawing rooms with complaints. And what a peculiar time it is. Not quite night, not yet morning, just confusion wrapped in shadow. You light another candle. It sputters like it's annoyed to be bothered. You walk softly to the front room, trying not to wake the household. The dog stirs but doesn't follow. You step over a creaky floorboard near the armchair. Too late. It lets out a noise that could wake the dead, or at least a neighbour. You settle near the fireplace. No fire, of course. Too much fuss at this hour. But you open a book, hoping for distraction. Something tedious, perhaps. A treatise on hydrotherapy or a botanical journal. Victorians loved routine, and they trusted that boring tasks would coax the brain towards surrender. But no luck. Your mind is too alert, too aware of the stillness. It's not just you. The entire era seemed to run on over-alertness. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, every minute was scheduled, every hour calculated. Meals were taken at fixed times, carriages arrived promptly at past. Letters were written and delivered with ruthless efficiency. Your body, however, isn't mechanical. It wants what it always has. Light in the morning, darkness at night, time to drift, not tick. But the age of machines had arrived, and Victorians were determined to outwit their own biology. Historians still argue whether the mechanization of life directly triggered the uptick in sleep disorders. But something shifted. Diaries from this era often mention lying awake, fretting over missed appointments, unpaid bills, or the philosophical implications of Darwin's new book. As one mid-century clerk noted, "My mind whirs like the gears of the printing press." Even meals became suspect. Doctors advised against heavy suppers, but the working classes rarely had time for lunch, and the wealthy? They dined at 9 and then were expected to sleep by 10. That roast venison and syllabub weren't exactly soporific. You sip from the teacup you forgot on the sideboard earlier. Cold again, no surprise. Victorian homes were not known for their central heating. Fires had to be coaxed from coal and luck, and in most middle-class homes, warmth faded after supper, leaving blankets and brandy to do the heavy lifting. You wrap a shawl tighter around your shoulders. It smells faintly of camphor and pipe smoke. You glance at the clock again. Only a few minutes have passed. Still, you persist. If routine is the enemy, perhaps boredom is the weapon. And so, you resume your nightly ritual, reorganizing your shoes by heel height, retying the same curtain tassel 3 times, or practicing penmanship in the dark. Victorians had entire books devoted to productive wakefulness. Dozing, they said, was weakness. Better to be writing letters, sorting buttons, or reflecting on your spiritual failings. You jot a note in your journal. 3:30. Awake again. Suspect mutton pie. Mind refuses to stop rehearsing tomorrow's reply to Lady Havisham. A Across town, a similar note might be written by a solicitor, a laundress, a student, all tossing, all hurning. And yet, insomnia was seen as a personal failing. Weak nerves, overstimulation, too much imagination. Never the world's fault. One popular physician even claimed sleeplessness was caused by reading novels with female protagonists, which he said inspired mental fancies unbefitting rest. You'd like to believe he said that just to sell more pamphlets, but no, he meant it. You turn the page of your book, the ink has faded, the words blur. Not from tiredness, but from a draft sneaking through the window frame. You rise again, fingers numb, and consider stuffing a handkerchief into the crack. It doesn't help. You pass the grandfather clock in the hallway. Its tick feels accusatory now, like a judgmental librarian. Tick, 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 as if measuring your failure by the second. Back in bed, you try the breathing technique your cousin swears by, counting up to 12 on the inhale, back down on the exhale. You reach 7 before remembering the butcher's bill is still unpaid. You're not alone. Charles Dickens himself wrote about wandering the streets of London in the dead of night. He too suffered from insomnia, claiming that long walks at 2 a.m. helped still his racing mind. You wonder if he ever stopped to admire the same gaslight flickers or stray cats curled by bakery doors. And so the routine continues. Tick, stretch, sigh, shift. Try not to think about the letter you forgot to send, or the odd noise coming from the rafters, or the pressing idea for a poem that won't let you go until morning. Insomnia isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just this, a slow, persistent hum behind your eyes, a never-ending rehearsal for tomorrow's responsibilities, a tiny rebellion against schedules and clocks and rational Victorian order. Eventually, you settle into stillness. Not sleep, but stillness. And in the cold hush of that moment, your mind drifts not into dreams, but into the space where they usually wait. Somewhere in the house, a clock strikes 4. You hear it, even though the sound is soft. More suggestion than chime. The air in your bedroom has cooled. Your breath curls faintly in front of you, visible for just a second before vanishing. Your fingers pull the blanket up again, but the weight of the fabric does nothing to quiet the rumbling in your stomach. Which, oddly enough, brings you to tonight's next attempt at sleep. Food. Victorians believed quite strongly in bedtime snacks. Not cookies and warm cocoa, mind you. This wasn't a milk and cereal affair. No, they turned to broths, brews, and mysterious, digestive draughts that often did more to startle the system than soothe it. If you're lucky, someone left you a bit of cold beef tea by the fireplace. Yes, beef tea. Made from slow-simmered cuts of meat, beef tea was considered one of the most nourishing and sleep-inducing drinks of the era. You sip it now, lukewarm and vaguely metallic, like salty fog in a cup. It does not help. Other recipes suggested mulled wine, barley water, or hot ale with spices. Anything warm, comforting, and ideally fermented. In some households, it was common to take a cordial before bed, usually something involving brandy, orange peel, and herbs with names like bitterroot or sorrow thistle. Historians still argue whether these concoctions ever truly worked or whether they simply made the drinker too tipsy to care. Either way, many Victorians swore by them. You try not to think too hard about the last time you drank poppy syrup and dreamed of arguing ferrets playing the harpsichord. Still, the logic was there. Warmth in the belly could pull the blood away from the brain, slow the mind, and lull one into sleep. That was the idea, at least. You finish the cup and wipe your mouth with a lace-trimmed napkin, which only reminds you of the embroidery you never finished. Another item for the list. The fire has gone out again. You stir it once half-heartedly, but let it rest. Flames aren't required for the kind of warmth you need now. You think of Mrs. Featherstone down the lane. She claims she once fell asleep instantly after chewing 10 raw almonds and humming God Save the Queen backwards. Her husband confirmed the story. Then again, he also insisted he saw the ghost of Admiral Nelson in their pantry, so credibility is a sliding scale. More scientifically minded Victorians turned to diets, complex, structured, slightly absurd. Some swore off dairy, blaming cheese for nightmares. Others insisted on only pale-coloured foods after sunset. There were entire guides about colour-correct foods for rest. White bread? Yes. Dark rye? Absolutely not. No one could explain why. You reach under the bed and retrieve a tin of preserved ginger. It's technically for travel, but tonight, it counts as medicine. One small bite, and it tastes like someone bottled a lightning strike and wrapped it in sugar. Not exactly calming. In more rural households, families believed in seasonal eating to improve sleep. In spring, they chewed dried violets. In autumn, baked apples with cloves. Winter called for bone broth and baked onion tea. You're not quite that rural, but you respect the effort. You lie back once more, stomach now full of beef tea, ginger, and regret. What no one seemed to account for was the unpredictability of digestion. Sometimes a hot ale before bed leads to snoring dreams. Other times, it leads to dramatic stomach gurgles, loud enough to frighten the dog. The Victorians believed the stomach was connected to the soul. Judging by the noises yours is making, your soul is tap dancing. You turn onto your side, then your other side, then onto your back. No position feels right. Your pillow smells faintly of lavender, but also of disappointment. You think about taking another walk through the house, but the floorboards are plotting against you tonight. Instead, you remember another theory, that dreams could be coaxed into existence by flavors. Sweet things invited pleasant visions, bitter ones chased away bad spirits. A curious fringe of culinary mystics even believed that the combination of honey and cinnamon before bed could attract visitations from long-dead relatives. You made that mistake once. You saw Uncle Percival. He had advice about your posture and absolutely nothing helpful to say about sleeping. Some physicians blamed sleeplessness on the failure to observe the correct order of meals. Dinner too late, tea too early, no supper at all. A recipe for disaster. The recommended schedule was rigid. Breakfast at 8, tea at 4, supper at 8:30, dreams by 10. Your schedule was never that tidy. You glance at the clock again. Nearly 5. Dawn is whispering along the rooftops now, faint grey light brushing the edges of the room. The curtains flutter slightly. A bird chirps once. You feel betrayed by nature. How dare it begin another day when you haven't finished the last one? You pull the blanket back over your head and try to imagine warm ovens, cozy armchairs, the gentle crunch of toast. Not quite dreams, but maybe close enough. And beneath it all, that odd truth remains. Victorian sleep was rarely restful. It was ritualistic, fed by superstition, maintained by midnight snacks, and haunted by indigestion. And even now, as your stomach gurgles and your eyes begin to blur, you can't help but wonder, who decided that meat juice was a sleep aid? The sun has not fully risen, but its arrival is implied. A pale strip of blue peeks through the curtains, and somewhere in the neighbourhood, a milkman is already rattling bottles. You're still awake, of course. Eyes dry, thoughts frayed, limbs tired but uncooperative. You consider what the doctor recommended last week. A course of treatment, not for your body, but for your sensibilities. The diagnosis? Hysteria. And the prescription? Fainting couches, smelling salts, and if you were truly unfortunate, pelvic massages conducted by doctors with stern moustaches and very little eye contact. Thankfully, tonight we won't linger on that. Victorian medicine had a knack for categorizing sleeplessness differently depending on your gender. If you were a woman, insomnia was rarely just sleeplessness. It was part of something larger, something troublesome, something emotional. Hysteria covered everything, from sadness to insomnia to simply being alive and curious. It was the multi-tool of 19th century diagnosis. You sit on the edge of your bed and look toward the corner, where your own fainting couch waits. It's more decorative than functional. No one actually faints on it. You tried once to see if it felt natural. It didn't. The fainting couch is stuffed with horsehair and awkwardness. It was once believed that reclining at a precise angle could allow the female mind to slow its racing thoughts. Never mind that the female mind was not so different from any other, just more often interrupted by male doctors with clipboards and assumptions. Historians still argue whether these gendered treatments for sleep were ever genuinely therapeutic or merely ornamental acts designed to reinforce societal order. Either way, they certainly didn't involve much sleep. You recall the story of Lady Vembridge, who once confessed to having not slept in 3 years, except during sermons. Her doctor told her to wear rosewater-soaked gloves to bed and avoid reading the newspaper. She later ran off with a music teacher and claimed she'd finally gotten a proper 8 hours. Of course, men had their own diagnoses, mostly involving overwork or brain heat, but women? Women were told to lie down and not trouble themselves, which was difficult to do when lying down made you feel like your own corset was trying to kill you. Even the furniture was against you. Beds were often high off the ground, an architectural metaphor for unreachable rest. Mattresses were stuffed with horsehair, feathers, or, if you were very unfortunate, straw. Springs squeaked, blankets scratched, and mosquito netting, while elegant, did very little about actual mosquito. Your body aches in places you didn't know had names, the stiffness behind your knees, the pressure on your temples, the inexplicable soreness in your fingers from writing 2 sentences earlier in the evening. You wonder if any of the many rest cures actually worked. One involved being confined to a dark room for weeks, spoken to only by servants and visited by doctors who would prescribe strict regimens of beef extract, milk, and complete silence. Another method? Journaling, but only with supervision, and only in a tone considered non-stimulating. Try writing about your own sleeplessness while pretending it doesn't bother you. You attempted it once and fell asleep out of sheer frustration. Perhaps that was the real strategy. You lie back, tucking your feet under the quilt. You close your eyes and think of the heavy silence of a well-draped parlour. Some women in the 1870s began experimenting with Turkish hammams and steam baths as remedies. Others joined spiritualist circles, not for the ghosts but for the peaceful silence of seances. Some believed that the cure was in the company. A warm lap, a hand stroking your hair, a gentle voice reading by candlelight. But emotional needs were rarely discussed openly. Instead, they were filed under womanly nerves and handed off to doctors with far too many velvet chairs. A distant church bell rings. You can't tell if it's for a funeral or for breakfast. In this twilight moment, both feel equally plausible. You reach for a small vial on your nightstand, lavender oil, infused with something labelled nightwort. You dab it on your wrist, then sneeze violently. Aromatherapy was very much in vogue, but few Victorians had the science to back it. You recall the time your neighbour brewed a tea made from crushed ivy leaves. She claimed it eased dreams. It also stained her tongue green for 3 days. Still, the hope remained. That sleep could be invited. Lured, that somewhere in the velvet folds of fainting couches and perfumed gloves, rest might sneak in. Your eyes close again, not from drowsiness but from surrender. You imagine yourself in a grand London townhouse, lying in a room painted in muted grey-blue. Heavy curtains muffling the morning, a canary chirping somewhere, faintly, and your thoughts, finally, slowing. Not stopping, never that, but slowing, softening. You do not dream, but for a few moments you stop rehearsing the next day, and that, perhaps, is enough. You're not sure when you last felt truly tired, the kind of tired that arrives like a blanket, heavy and unquestionable. What you feel now is something else entirely. A thrum in the bones, a low buzz behind the eyes, a strange alertness that's more mechanical than natural. You lie there, blinking slowly, trying to remember what sleep is supposed to feel like. That's when you remember the gadgets. Victorian inventors, ever optimistic and slightly unhinged, believed that machines could solve just about anything, including insomnia, and so began the age of peculiar bedtime contraptions, many of which you've either encountered, tried, or actively feared. Let's start with the vibrating helmet. Yes, that's a real thing. A sort of iron bonnet, lined with padding and copper wiring, designed to gently rattle your skull into slumber. You wore it once, or rather you submitted to wearing it during a visit to your cousin's house in Brighton. It made you feel like an electrified teapot and left your ears ringing for days. Still, your cousin swore by it. Another favourite, the sandbag blanket. The idea was simple. If the weight of the world kept you awake, perhaps the weight of 30 pounds of sand, sewn into a quilted wrap, could coax you to rest. You tried it once. It did not feel like a hug. It felt like being buried politely. Historians still argue whether these sleep devices were genuine attempts at therapy or elaborate exercises in selling hope. Some were patented, advertised in medical journals, and even endorsed by semi-respectable physicians. Others, like the water-cooled pillow or the adjustable spinal alignment cot, disappeared without a trace, perhaps swallowed by the collective embarrassment of those who tried them. You sit up now, squinting at the small drawer where you keep your own sleep gadgets. A leather strap that's meant to wrap around your chin and prevent snoring. A weighted eye mask that smells permanently of rosemary. A small ceramic jar labelled electrostatic balm, which once sparked when applied near a radiator. You reach for none of them. And yet, some devices were less mechanical and more ritualistic. One popular item was the sound wheel, a rotating cylinder that clicked softly as it turned, meant to hypnotize the brain into boredom. You borrowed one from a neighbor, only to discover that the clicking perfectly matched the rhythm of your intrusive thoughts. There was also the breathing bellows, essentially a fan that pulsed air toward your face to simulate a breeze. Gentle, repetitive, designed to lull. It mostly just dried your eyes out and made the candle flicker like a haunted lantern. One of the strangest machines of all came from France, the Somnivox, a bed-mounted horn that whispered repetitive phrases like "rest now" and "the day is done" in a soothing male voice. It worked, apparently, until someone accidentally replaced the wax cylinder with an old political speech. That night, 3 people in Lyon dreamed they were being chased by a bureaucrat with a monocle. You think back to the instruction manuals, all printed with absurd confidence, recommended by physicians, tested on over 300 sleepless volunteers, guaranteed results or your nerves back. The real result? A generation of people willing to strap their heads to machines, coil wires under their pillows, and fall asleep under buzzing, blinking devices that made sleep seem more like a science experiment than a natural act. And perhaps the oddest part was the silence around it. These gadgets were rarely mocked in public. There were no parody reviews, no skeptical op-eds. People were desperate. They wanted solutions. They were willing to try anything. You understand that. You live it. Tonight, though, you keep the drawer shut. No rattling helmets. No sand quilts. Just your own breathing, the rustle of sheets, and the distant creak of someone else's sleepless footsteps on the floorboards above. The gas lamp gutters low. You adjust the wick with a practiced hand. The room is dimmer now, shadows softening into one another. It should feel restful. It should. You try a trick you read in a magazine once, staring at a single object and letting your eyes go unfocused. You choose a cracked porcelain figurine on the mantel, something vaguely Grecian, arms missing. You stare until it blurs into something both ancient and silly. Another trick involved counting backward from 1,000 while visualizing sheep wearing waistcoats. You reach 927 before remembering you forgot to wind the upstairs clock. The gadgets didn't work because they couldn't reach the real problem, the mind that refuses to be quiet, the memory that replays a conversation from 3 weeks ago, the little guilt that whispers, "You should have gone to sleep hours ago." And so you lie there, surrounded by a century of failed inventions, absurd promises, and gentle vibrations. You're part of a long tradition now, a lineage of sleepless Victorians, blinking into the dark, testing the newest method with weary hope. No gadget can change that. But maybe the act of trying was its own comfort. Maybe, just maybe, sleep isn't something you conquer. It's something that arrives when you've given up trying. It's nearly 6 now. The earliest birds have begun their ritual announcements, their chirps sounding far too optimistic for your current state of mind. You pull the blanket over your head like a curtain and pretend the world isn't starting yet, but it is. And with it comes a very Victorian panic: cleanliness. If sleep won't come, perhaps purity will suffice. The Victorians were obsessed with hygiene, not just bodily, but moral, spiritual, and spatial. A clean house, they believed, meant a clean mind. And a clean mind? Well, that might just be a sleeping one. You sit up and scan your room. It looks fine. But to a 19th century housekeeper, it would look dangerously close to moral collapse. Which is why many Victorians took to sleep hygiene with terrifying enthusiasm. Bed sheets were scalded in boiling water. Floors were scrubbed until the wood grain wept. Mattresses were upended weekly, sometimes beaten with sticks, sometimes stuffed anew with straw, feathers, or, in one very regrettable instance, a layer of dried moss that gave 3 people a rash and invited a family of shrews. You remember your own mattress saga. Aunt Lydia insisted that wool was the only acceptable stuffing. But wool attracted moths. And where moths go, mildew follows. One summer night, you woke to find the underside of your mattress pulsing softly with humidity. Sleep didn't stand a chance. Then there were the bed bugs. Victorians feared bed bugs with the intensity of a Gothic villain fearing daylight. The tiniest scratch on the ankle could unleash a hygiene panic. Some families lit sulfur candles under the bed, others poured kerosene along floorboard cracks, then went to bed anyway, eyes watering, lungs filled with chemical dreams. Historians still argue whether the obsession with parasites stemmed from science or class anxiety. Cleanliness was status. Filth, even imagined, was a threat. And nowhere did this anxiety settle more deeply than in the mattress. You remember an article in the Household Almanac warning that sleeping in unturned bedding may invite nightmares, nervous trembling, and a loss of moral fortitude. One woman reportedly blamed her son's criminal behavior on a poorly aired duvet. You shift in your bed now, aware of every crinkle and seam. The sheet tangles around your ankle like an accusation. The pillow is too warm, but flipping it just reveals a layer of crushed lavender that makes you sneeze. You rise again, what else is there to do, and make your way to the washstand. The water is cold. You splash your face and catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, pale, hair wild, eyes a little too wide. There's comfort in the ritual, though. The brushing of hair, the dabbing of rose water, the methodical folding of yesterday's clothes. If you can't sleep, at least you can pretend you're preparing for it again. You remember a neighbour who washed her sheets daily and insisted on dusting under the bed between dinner and bedtime. When asked why, she simply replied, "The fleas don't rest. Why should I?" In more extreme cases, people employed professional bed inspectors, men hired to examine mattresses for pests, mildew, or rest-disrupting irregularities. Some came with magnifying glasses, others just poked aggressively and frowned. And it wasn't just about bugs. Victorians believed that sleep could be contaminated by proximity to filth. If your bed was near the coal scuttle, you might inhale soot and dream of demons. If your chamber pot hadn't been emptied, well, we won't go into that. Your own chamber pot is tucked neatly under the side table, untouched but threatening. You wonder if it radiates a kind of anti-sleep energy. You light another candle, not because you need light, but because it smells faintly of beeswax and gives the illusion of calm. You settle back onto the mattress, pulling a corner of the blanket over your toes with the precision of someone avoiding a wrinkle. A newspaper article once claimed that a wrinkled sheet could cause spinal misalignment and dreams of war. You believed it at the time. You were 12. Still, some rituals persist because they give structure to the structureless. When sleep doesn't come, routine fills the gap. Tuck the sheet, puff the pillow, breathe, wait. Of course, it wasn't just the physical environment Victorians tried to control. They also cleansed the spiritual atmosphere. Bedside prayers were common, prayers for peace, health, forgiveness, and for dreams unsullied by guilt. You try one now, half-remembered lines from childhood. Now I lay me down to sleep. If I should die before I wake. Not exactly comforting. But then again, nothing about Victorian bedtime was. Mortality lurked beneath every goose-down coverlet. And yet here you are, alive, awake, clean, and still tired. You listen to the creak of the house settling, the distant clip-clop of a horse-drawn milk cart, the scratch of a tree branch against the window, the dog snoring faintly in its basket. Everything is beginning. And you're still somewhere in the middle, not asleep, not quite awake, just existing in a clean, mildly disinfected limbo. Maybe that's all sleep really is, an intermission between anxieties. Or maybe, if you scrub the bed frame hard enough, it'll finally arrive. The sky has brightened now, faint streaks of yellow brushing the tops of chimneys outside your window. Morning is declaring itself with quiet confidence, though you haven't quite earned your way into it. The room glows faintly, that pale Victorian gold of filtered sunlight slipping past thick drapes and dust motes. You didn't sleep, not really, but there's still one remedy left in your drawer. A small leather pouch embroidered with copper thread. You unwrap it carefully. Inside, a pair of magnetic bracelets, worn smooth by months of nighttime desperation, one for each wrist. You slip them on, more out of ritual than belief. These, too, were once the future. In the 1870s and 1880s, the sleep-deprived elite swore by magnetism. Not the science classroom kind, no, something more mystical, more persuasive. Sleep, they believed, could be summoned through magnetic alignment, with tiny forces pulsing through your body like invisible lullabies. Electromagnetic pillows, copper thread blankets, iron rods placed under the mattress. One ambitious inventor created the somno-coil, a device that wrapped the sleeper in a continuous current of earth harmony. He died penniless, but his pamphlets were poetic. You remember visiting a sleep salon once, just once, where a man named Dr. Wexley adjusted your personal field by waving magnets over your spine while humming a vaguely threatening lullaby. You left with a headache and a mysterious craving for boiled carrots. Historians still argue whether these magnet men were charlatans or misunderstood pioneers, but Victorian newspapers were filled with their testimonials. A colonel who hadn't slept since the Crimean War claimed he slumbered like a baby after strapping an iron bar to his footboard. A duchess insisted that her dreams improved dramatically once she installed copper rods in her hat boxes. Even Queen Victoria herself dabbled in it, though quietly, through a trusted physician. It was all very discreet. You turn over and rest your wrists on the pillow, waiting for the magnets to hum, or vibrate, or whisper some secret frequency to your nerves. They don't. They never do. And yet, there's a comfort in the attempt. The Victorians had a theory for this too, that the act of preparing for sleep, even if the sleep itself never arrived, was restorative. They believed in effort, in remedies, in controlling the uncontrollable with brass instruments and herbal tinctures. You think about the advertisements: magnetic bracelets for melancholia, fatigue, and restless thoughts. Insomnia. Realign your life with the invisible power of Earth's natural fields. Recommended by clergymen, widows, and 6 out of 10 certified mesmerists. You never found a mesmerist. But you did try sleeping next to a battery once, at the suggestion of a neighbour who'd read about it in a journal. The idea was that the mild electrical current would soothe and realign the cranial rhythms. What it did instead was explode your hairbrush. That same neighbour swore by pine needles under the mattress, cold spoons on the eyelids, and reading the Book of Common Prayer backwards. You tried all 3. Only the prayer book gave results, and that was mainly because you fell asleep trying to pronounce begotten 5 times in reverse. Some took the science further. They tried tuning forks, sound frequencies, holding quartz while reciting Latin verses. The line between medicine and seance was extremely thin, especially in the darker corners of Victorian sleep culture. You lie still now, feeling the faint weight of the bracelets on your wrists. You imagine your blood flowing around them like a lazy river, occasionally pausing to wonder if you've been magnetized yet. It's oddly calming. Maybe it's not the magnets, maybe it's the routine, the slow, deliberate act of saying to your body, I'm trying, not forcing, not demanding, just trying. You glance again at the drawer. So many objects in there. Tiny monuments to your nightly ritual. Sleep never visits with fanfare, but these things, these devices, give the night a shape. And so, you wear the bracelets even though you know they're nonsense, because some part of you believes, still, that tonight might be the night when the rhythm slows, when the air thickens just enough to cradle you, when you sink without ceremony into something that feels like forgetting. Maybe. Outside, the birds have multiplied. A cart rolls by, its wheels squeaking gently. Footsteps echo from a neighbour's stoop. The city is waking, or rather, continuing, since half of it never truly sleeps. You pull the covers tighter, shielding yourself from the optimism of morning. The bracelets stay on. The drapes stay closed. Your eyes, they blink slower now. Not closed, but heavy. Not asleep, but close. And in this liminal state, hovering just above sleep, you feel it. Not the magnets, not the electricity, not even fatigue, but the quiet. And sometimes, that's enough. You don't remember falling asleep. That would imply it happened. But now, you're in a strange space, somewhere between the ticking of the mantle clock and the idea of rest. You haven't dreamt, but you haven't exactly been awake either. The room is the same, and yet, everything feels 1 degree softer, like someone lowered the contrast of reality. And here, at last, comes the final culprit. You. You've tried food, you've tried baths, you've tried magnets, prayer and fainting couches. But in the Victorian mind, when all else failed, one inevitable explanation remained. You weren't sleeping because you were morally weak. Yes, that was the grand finale of 19th century sleep logic. Not the bed bugs, not the bad mutton, not the electrostatic pillow you accidentally zapped yourself with, just your own flawed, undisciplined, frivolous self. Insomnia, they said, was a failure of character. Doctors wrote lengthy essays about the dangers of overthinking, overreading, and overstimulating oneself with emotion or curiosity. Men were told not to read novels after dinner. Women were advised not to feel too strongly about anything, lest their dreams turn sour or refuse to come at all. One clergyman declared that a clear conscience is the surest pillow. You tried that once. It didn't help. Consciences, like mattresses, are rarely so neat. You roll to your side, then back again. The blankets feel heavier now, not with weight, but with judgment. You think of all the little rules. Never drink cold water after 8. No laughing within an hour of bed. Avoid topics of sorrow, excitement, or travel. Never sleep near books. Always burn lavender. Historians still argue whether Victorians believed these things out of genuine conviction or out of sheer exhaustion. But the moral framing of sleeplessness stuck deep. Those who could not sleep were seen as soft, sensitive, prone to unproductive introspection. You, it seems, were too thoughtful for your own good. You remember Mrs. Aldrich, the local widow, who once confessed to the doctor that she hadn't slept since the funeral. His solution? Less thinking, fewer walks, and the removal of all poetry from her bedroom. When she resumed sleeping a month later, she credited it to eating boiled parsnips. But the doctor took credit anyway. You've done it all. No novels in bed, no laughter past dusk. You even avoided blue wallpaper, as one advice column claimed it made the nerves twitchy. Still, here you are, nerves intact, sleep absent, and it doesn't help that the Victorians measured worth in industriousness. If you couldn't sleep and then rise promptly at 6 to churn butter or pen a sonnet, what good were you? Sleeplessness, one medical guide claimed, was the shadow of indolence. You once tried to explain your insomnia to a visiting uncle. He stared for a moment and said, "Try harder." You did. You tried harder every night. You cleansed your thoughts. You counted good deeds. You confessed imaginary sins. You drank valerian and thought only of sheep. You avoided satire. You ironed your nightgown. And yet, still, your mind spins. Maybe that's the secret. You're not failing at sleep. You're simply too awake for the 19th century. Too aware. Too restless. too curious. You turn again and watch a line of sunlight crawl slowly up the wall. It's golden, unhurried. The dog stretches in its basket, groaning like an old man. You sigh. The morning smells of soot and tea. A neighbour is opening shutters with a wooden clack. A newspaper hits someone's doorstep. Somewhere, someone has slept all night and will rise refreshed, bright-eyed, with no memory of the minutes they missed. You envy them. But at the same time, you realise something peculiar. This long, winding night wasn't wasted. You've travelled through time, medicine, superstition and science, accompanied by the strange chorus of TikTok remedies and herbal regrets. You didn't find sleep, but you did find something, the absurd beauty of human persistence. The rituals, the gadgets, the scented gloves, the nonsense pills and midnight snacks. All of it wrapped in a fragile hope that maybe, tonight will be different. And even now, as the world brightens around you, you cling to that idea. You pull the covers tighter once more. The bracelets remain on your wrists. The tea is cold, but still beside you. The air hums. The light is gentle. You didn't sleep, but you haven't given up. And that, in its own ridiculous Victorian way, is admirable. The city has fully woken. You hear the soft rhythm of footsteps outside, wheels creaking over cobblestones, a door swinging open 2 houses down, and the faint clatter of utensils on porcelain as someone attempts a civil breakfast. A kettle whistles from a distant kitchen. Toast is being made. Bacon sizzles in a pan. And you lie still, eyes half open, aware that you've survived the entire night without sleeping, again. But there is something different this time, an odd calmness, as if the pressure has finally dissolved. You're not wrestling with sleep anymore. You've let go of the fight. Maybe that's the only real cure. Victorian advice givers would disagree, of course. They would prescribe a long walk along a foggy embankment, followed by a dry biscuit, a tepid bath, and an uplifting psalm read aloud by someone deeply repressed. But you, lying there beneath your slightly scratchy blankets, know better. You've tried every Victorian cure this house could hold, some bizarre, some soothing, some suspiciously flammable, and in the end, none delivered what they promised, not truly. You think back through the night, the bath that barely warmed you, the laudanum that whispered nonsense, the snoring helmet, the sandbag quilt, the magnet bracelets, the beef tea, the lavender pillowcase, the moral shaming, the fainting couch, the vibrating bonnet, the spoonful of ginger you regretted instantly. Each one offered a small hope, and each one left you exactly where you began, watching dust curl in the air and listening to the rhythm of someone else's life waking up next door. Historians still argue whether Victorians were genuinely obsessed with insomnia, or if they simply talked about it more because they had fewer distractions. No late-night entertainment, no glowing screens, no scrolling through strangers' arguments on trains. Just the self, the mind, the quiet. And maybe that's what made sleeplessness feel so heavy back then. It wasn't just about rest, it was about being alone with yourself, with your memories, your worries, your wildly specific list of social embarrassments from 9 years ago. You turn your head and spot a single beam of sun slipping between the curtains. It lands right on your worn slipper, the one with the loose button and frayed edge. It's not remarkable, but it's yours, familiar, a reminder that life continues whether you're rested or not. You think of the thousands of Victorians who lay awake just like this. Shopkeepers, midwives, schoolchildren, poets, all wrapped in 2 heavy quilts, staring at dancing gaslight shadows, listening to clocks that never stop ticking. And you, part of that long tradition, a heritage of insomnia, a lineage of yawns. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed. The floor is cold, but not cruel. You stretch. Your joints pop like little complaints, but you don't mind. You didn't sleep, but you lived through the night, and sometimes that's enough. You wash your face at the basin. The water shocks you into a sharper awareness, not quite wakefulness, but something close. The mirror greets you with honesty. Hair askew, eyes slightly puffy. Expression, mildly haunted librarian. You smile. You pick up your dressing gown and wrap yourself in it. Somewhere downstairs, someone will be lighting the stove, breakfast will happen, the dog will beg for toast. The day will begin, and so will you. Not well rested, not radiant, but present. And just as you reach for the doorknob to leave the room, the oddest thing happens. You yawn. A real one. Your body finally remembers what it was supposed to do. But the day has started, and now it's too late. So you walk on, into the morning, into the city, into another day that will likely end the same way it began, with you, beneath a blanket, waiting for sleep that may or may not come. But tonight, who knows? Tonight might be different. And now, as we reach the end of our journey through sleepless Victorian nights, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften, like fading ink on the corner of an old letter. The gas lamps have gone out. The clocks still tick, but their sound is distant now, like footsteps in another room. The dog is quiet. The city hums gently in the background, no longer calling your name. You've walked through shadowy corridors of velvet-draped bedrooms and half-lit kitchens, through cabinets of herbal tinctures and drawers full of strange gadgets, through the old, strange logic of laudanum, lavender, and late-night beef tea. Let it all fall away now. You're not in a fainting couch or wrapped in a sandbag quilt. You're just here, breathing, existing, drifting gently between memory and sleep. Let the worry of the ticking clock go. Let the ache in your spine fade into the mattress. Let your thoughts dissolve one by one, like sugar in a forgotten cup of tea. There is nothing more to try tonight. No more cures, no more clocks, no more wondering. Just the quiet. And the promise of rest, maybe not now, maybe not soon, but eventually. And in this space, between waking and dreaming, that promise is enough. So close your eyes, if they aren't already. Feel the weight of the blanket, and allow yourself, at last, to let go.